Okay, thanks everyone. Two great sessions to get us started for the afternoon. We have one more session to listen to. We're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to move on to efforts that we can really take advantage of a lot of these unique proclivities we have and skills and abilities we have during young adulthood, particularly in terms of risk-taking and problem solving and exploration and so on and so on. I think it was really, although I didn't intentionally ask Devin to seed this one, but when Devin said, well, everyone knows everything about brain development until age 5 nowadays, but no one really knows much about 16. We're very fortunate to have Leah Somerville on stage, who really has been one of the pioneers in helping us to understand about the unique nature of brain development during the years after, well, throughout the teenage years, but including the years of 16 and above and the transition to adulthood. Leah is a professor at Harvard University and a leading developmental neuroscientist. We're also very thrilled to have Anthony Waller here, who is a co-founder of Athlete to Athlete. Unfortunately, our third panelist, Robert Jadone, who's the director of the startup UCLA Accelerator, is not able to make it today through, I believe, some of the chaos and the plane travel that is happening today, and radar's not working, and backup all over the country. But at any rate, so in terms of risk-taking, we're very thrilled that Anthony is going to be here because he was a member of the UCLA Startup Accelerator program, but the person who led the program is not here on stage. So we're going to ask Anthony to take two roles today, but he's an entrepreneur, and I think he can more than handle it. One reason why we shifted gears here was to really sort of dig a little bit deeper into the brain science, but also to really dive into this question of risk-taking and entrepreneurship among young adults. And I have to say, again, giving credit to Devin, when we talked about sort of the ability of young people to use these investments as they will, you had mentioned a lot of folks talking about, I want to start a business. I want to be an entrepreneur. And this should really be accessible to a lot of us in this community. And it's just not accessible to a lot of folks. And what's really interesting is that here at a place like UCLA, which is a very large state university, we serve many first-generation college students. We serve very diverse populations of youth. We have large numbers of transfer students. A lot of folks don't realize that actually, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Dean, but in the third and fourth year, it's about 40% of our students are transferred into UCLA. So really a state university taking the initiative to provide entrepreneurship education to its students, that it's not simply the purview of certain private schools in the Northeast and so on. So we're really thrilled about that. So we're going to talk about that as well. But we're going to get started off by talking about Leah. And I'm going to ask you to give us a primer a little bit on brain development in the years of 16. But what have we been endowed with through nature and evolution during the years of adolescence? What's unique about it? What's exciting about it? How can we spread the word?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks so much for inviting me here. It's really such a pleasure to get outside and learn about some of the applications of the way science can infiltrate discussions about policy and youth development in these kinds of spaces. And I'm happy to be a resident scientist in the room in case anyone has questions, although I can't venture to represent all the science. But let me give you, I thought I'd start out by giving a few themes that researchers have really touched on over the years to really emphasize the ways in which adolescent development is both normative and also very much still underway as people grow and change through their teens and maybe into the 20s or beyond. So one thing to note is that scientists tend to study human development. There's a wide range of ways that people try to develop scientific insights about how adolescents might be unique. I'll be describing research that uses a variety of different kinds of tools and methods. One such tool is use of non-invasive brain imaging, which is using primarily MRI, but not necessarily only MRI-based imaging, to measure the volumes and functions and brain connection networks of and how they change as a person grows. These can be studies of a person as they're changing and growing. Commonly, they're also studies of large numbers of people. So when we talk about findings that are focused on development, we're usually thinking about these changes on average that don't necessarily apply to every single person, but sort of characterize the changes that take place over time or across age. And that's, sort of a reminder that the scientific themes that we might learn about don't necessarily apply to any single person perfectly, but characterize people as a group on average. Brain imaging has told us a lot about the trajectory of brain development as people progress through adolescence and beyond. One theme that became apparent a long while ago in science time is that brain development continues to change well past the age that maybe we would have expected through our intuitions. We can see measures indicating continued brain development through the teens, into the 20s, maybe even tapering off some of them into the 30s. And so we shouldn't think of adolescence as a time where a brain is just about finished changing. I mean, we should think about change as sort of dynamic and taking place well past the age of 18, which is, of course, the legal definition of adulthood in the United States. Another theme that may be worth mentioning and came up a few times over the course of today already is the fact that brain development unfolds along this long timeline is actually thought to be adaptive and helpful to a person. If the brain finished developing when people were much younger, it would result in those windows of plasticity that characterize developmental change being closed sooner, and adult roles and more sophisticated challenges that people face throughout adolescence into young adulthood may not be shaping and sculpting a brain for adult roles in a way that's as optimal as it does now. And so a changing brain and a changing person shouldn't be characterized as like a deficit model, like we just lack these adult abilities. We don't think of it that way. We think of it more as being a time of life where people are gathering up lots of new experiences, which then in turn shape and sculpt the development of the brain toward a brain that's ready to tackle the challenges of adulthood. A couple of domains that are relevant to financial decision-making, entrepreneurship, innovation. I'll just be really brief, but there's also research that we sometimes describe as behavioral research that places adolescents and young adults, people of varying ages, into different decision-making scenarios and collect data on what their choices are. We can then look over age how these decision processes change. And some themes that have emerged, I think, that are relevant for today include that adolescence is a period of life in which there is a heightened tolerance of risk in choices. This is not necessarily thought to be a bad thing. Taking risks means learning new things. It means trying new possibilities that could lead to positive outcomes or negative ones, but regardless of what direction it ends up, people have an opportunity to learn something. Similarly, research has looked at exploratory decision-making where people could pursue new information. So there might not necessarily be rewards and risks at play, but simply, would you rather try something new or just get the thing you already know about? Like at a restaurant, if you're ordering off a menu, do you pick something you already know you like, or do you try something different? The trying something different is exploratory because you're getting information about something new that could end up being better or worse than what you already know about. And we know from research that adolescents tend to be highly exploratory in their choices. Adults can explore too, but in a very selective way that's tuned to what's in it for me. And adolescence tends to explore more broadly, sometimes not knowing what good will come of that information, but pursuing it nonetheless. And so I think that we could think together about the implications for that kind of orientation toward the kinds of pursuit of innovation or taking risks in service of entrepreneurship that we're talking about in this session. There's more I could say, but I think I'll pause here because I don't want to hog the mic. But I'm happy to describe some other research during this session about learning or identity formation, if that's interesting too.
Thanks, Leah. It's all interesting to all of us, and we'll definitely get into some more of that. So, Anthony, we're really thrilled to have you here. So you're here because you participated in the Startup UCLA Accelerated program. I'm going to start first asking you, why did you do this in the first place? What drew you to participating in that program?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. I'm excited to be here as well. Yeah, it's a program on campus where essentially they put you through like a coursework almost, where they educate you on how entrepreneurship works. They connect you with mentors. They also provide you a little bit of capital. They give you $5,000 in startup capital. So it's actually not dissimilar to some of the programs that we've been talking about, just really hyper-targeted on early-stage startups.
Capital and coaching.
Capital and coaching and mentorship, yeah. So very, very, very similar. Definitely was just drawn to it. I think I've always tended to have more of this curiosity is maybe how I would describe what you were just referencing. This curiosity, this risk-taking behavior. Had always wanted to try something on my own, and I think it was a great program where I could get access to the information that I didn't have about how to do this specific goal, and they provided us with good resources to do that. So it was great. It was great to be able to be a part of it.
So you were always this way. Did you have some wicked lemonade stand when you were 6 or 7?
I wish. No, I think originally it was probably athletics where I had that similar kind of mindset that just like go get it, try something new, not really scared of failure. But I think lots of different people learn that attitude in many different ways.
Well, athletics and competition is a really important avenue for risk-taking for many diverse youth in our community. So in terms of, I won't ask you to do what Robert did, but when you think about maybe the top 2 elements of the Accelerator program in terms of the mentorship and coaching that they provided you, what were they? Like, how did they help you channel your desire to risk, to explore, to learn? What did they do?
Yeah, I mean, really what they did was remove barriers, honestly. I think there's a couple different kinds of barriers that were in the way. Again, in this very specific context, an information barrier for sure, at least for me, had no idea how you go about starting an early stage company, despite having this ambition to do so, right? So whether this is people who have done it themselves in the past coming in and speaking about it, tailored lessons, courses, presentations about how to approach the early stages of forming a corporation, who do you need to get involved early on, things like that. That's an important barrier to remove. It's an information barrier. And then there's also this like belief barrier, so to speak, because you kind of know, as with a lot of risk-taking things, the odds are not great. And it's not really a secret. So having people who have gone through this and have succeeded, both giving you information as a practical support, but also just giving you that emotional support and that reassurance that, hey, this is something that you can do. Again, very specific use case here, but it applies to sports, it applies to finances, it applies to everything. Just having that person who kind of, shows you that there's a possible outcome here.
That's certainly a common theme that's run through all of these sessions. Tell us about your business.
Yeah, so
because it's very unique, it's very relevant for what we're talking about today, what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, so interestingly, it's actually very similar to what Startup UCLA was doing. We're even more focused. So what Athlete to Athlete, the company, what we do is we pair current Division I college athletes with youth athletes in a virtual mentorship program. So I know there was some discussion about like building virtual programs, access to these people. We've run into very similar issues. And it's been really fascinating to kind of see how it's transformed and what has become some of the most effective parts of this program, right? Going into it, we didn't know exactly how this was going to work out, to be honest. And I think we've learned a couple critical things. Like, it's not so much about sports as it is about just having like an older sibling kind of role model. And so we've started structuring the training and onboarding that we have for the current college athletes around driving conversations towards how are things going outside of sports as well, how are things going at home. I'm just using this as a starting point for the discussion, but it's not really the goal. And I'm on a little tangent, but I actually saw a quote on the wall out there by John Wooden, which was that the ultimate goal of a coach is not to make better athletes, but better people, which I think is absolutely true and definitely the case with what we're doing, although you might think of it as, oh, I'm going to hire a college athlete to coach my kid. They're really just showing them like the qualities that it takes to be a great athlete, which can be applied elsewhere. So I think that's what Startup UCLA did. It's kind of what we're doing. It's what a lot of the programs are doing here. It's all very similar in nature.
Can't spend time on a UCLA campus without running into a John Wooden quote. That is for sure.
No, you can't.
He had a lot of them. It's fantastic.
It's a great quote.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So the mentorship is not focused on the sports as much as general how things are going. So what kinds of things, what are you trying to promote here? Like what are you trying to promote? New athletes, young people, all of the above? I mean, what's your goal here in the program, your company?
Yeah, I mean, like if we were to describe the ideal outcome, there's one specific piece of feedback that we've heard probably like dozens of times at this point, which is something to the extent of a parent coming out of it and saying, you know, ever since starting in the program, starting working with this mentor, I have never seen my kids study so hard for their exams. My daughter's getting up in the morning and making her bed. Like these simple things, which are just indicators of like an underlying motivation and belief in their own ability to improve, right? So you're really focusing on those qualities that you're trying to build in the young athletes. And again, sports is a great starting point. It's something that they're already interested in. It's kind of a language that the athletes can speak to them in that feels very relatable. But really, at the end of the day, it's absolutely about those qualities. That's what makes it a successful program.
I think it's so interesting and exciting what you're doing, because I always think that athletics, first of all, it's obviously very significant in the United States compared to other countries. It offers wonderful opportunities, but it can go wrong very fast if it's not done the right way. And I think it really, you learn a lot about American society if we look at athletic programs and systems for young people. Leah, in terms of a description of what he's trying to provide or what's going on, what do you respond to?
I mean, I love this program. It sounds super interesting and valuable. I mean, one thing that immediately comes to mind is research on how peer relationships can play a really important role in both helping adolescents form and kind of make clear to them their own identities, but also to develop habits, including both adaptive ones and sometimes maladaptive ones, depending. One theme that has come out of that research is the role that slightly older peers can play in being incredible teachers to adolescents and also to influence them for better or for worse. And it sounds like in this program, one of the key themes that's coming out is the appetite for influence, mentorship that adolescents have, and that especially slightly older individuals who are still like relatable to them and not the old dinosaurs like me, that they have in really getting through to adolescents and teaching them quite a bit. And so I think this is one of, you're capitalizing, I think, on this developmental interests that adolescents may have in peers, especially slightly older ones.
I'm glad that you flagged that situation, because this is a conversation Amaris and Devin and I were having. We were saying, Amaris, how did you learn to do what you do? What's the program like? And she did point out what was really important is that the leaders of this youth program were just a little bit older than she was. She made the exact same point. So can I ask you just to go a little bit deeper? Is there something about the adolescent brain that makes us particularly focused on peers and listening to them?
That's a good question. I mean, I think complex neural processes that represent something like peers it's a complicated thing to try to map to the brain, because what is it about peers that you're targeting? Is it about how you think about the minds of other people? Is it about how you use them as signals and tools for your own learning? Is it how information from them reflects on you and learning something about yourself? I mean, I think these things are all happening in the brain, and I think these are all processes that adolescents have access to and particular motivation maybe to pay attention to. Something else that might be relevant to learning processes that I wanted to mention, and it could come from peers or other ways, is that one way that adolescent learning is different from adult learning is that it is especially tuned to learning from one's own direct experiences. So there's research, for example, presenting participants with a chance to learn the associations between different cues, the random objects that link together. And if you pay attention, you can learn and notice those associations. There's a study where adults and teens were both given an instruction and says this one goes with this one. But in that study, the instruction was purposefully wrong. And so if you followed the instruction and simply did what someone told you, you would make a lot of wrong answers. And that's what adults did. We're very efficient thinkers. And if there's an instruction, we say, oh, good, then I don't need to go about the process of learning it myself. But adolescents were not susceptible to the false instruction. They used their own direct learning experiences to construct the associations, and they actually did better than adults. And so I think in the context of entrepreneurship or financial decision making, having access to doing decisions for yourself and then learning from them can be a really valuable, more valuable and more more entrenched, more life lessons, if you will, in adolescence than older ages, which might also contribute to the motivation to want to be doing things independently.
The folks who know me have heard this story 1,000 times, but I always tell the story about how my sons, who were really liked very complicated board games, multi-hour games, they bring home a new game. We play it once or twice. We might win, my wife and I, but after that we would lose consistently and they would stop asking us. Because we found one or two solutions, we followed the rule and then we stuck with it, but they spent the time in their early rounds to figure out how to really, really win the game. So, Anthony, to that end, have there been moments when you have felt that as you're building your business, that you were thinking differently about those perhaps older than you or perhaps some folks who invested in you, and how have you dealt with that? How have you sort of managed to capture that creativity and gently bring, as you put it, the old dinosaurs along toward your vision?
Oh yeah, that's a big question.
I know it is. Sorry, I didn't prep him
yeah.
on that question. And we can turn off the recordings now if you want.
No worries.
Okay.
No, you know, it is interesting. I think it's a bit of a dance, honestly. I think there's value to be had from experience, and there's also value in that, like that risk-taking, I'm going to do it myself and learn it. I do think that you can use frameworks that others have used before, and I think that's been helpful, like in the case of Startup UCLA. Like there is some overarching framework which is relatively applicable for most things, and if you find maybe a mentor for me would be more specifically somebody who's built a two-sided marketplace, like what we've built, and again, relevant frameworks, but then it's kind of on me to take that, like the next 25 steps, which is how does that actually apply to our customer base, how does that actually apply to our mentors? So it's definitely a little bit of a dance. But you combine both of them to make it work.
Well, the dance, I think, is a really nice example. I think that concept of a dance has come up numerous times in these other sessions about the dynamics of coaching and supporting young people, providing agency, but also support and structure, helping them lead, but also providing the right kind of financial coaching. Like you just said, experience matters. Amaris said, I want to know. I mean, frankly, we all want to know how to deal with the marketplace. That's an important point. Can I shift gears just a little bit? It's not a total shift, but to go back to you, Leah, one element of work that you've done is really focusing on this idea of goal-directed learning during adolescence and particularly the transition to young adulthood. Could you tell us a little bit more of what that's all about and how we can be thinking about it?
Yes, thank you. So research in my team has looked at goal-directed decision-making or goal-directed behavior in a number of different ways. This includes essentially what I mean when I say goal-directed means to orchestrate your behavior in the way to satisfy a goal that you have. We can think about goals that are intrinsic to the person, like long-term goals about their, pursuing something in their lives. We tend in the lab to think about more local goals like maximizing your performance to get a reward on a task or something like that. And yes, there's a lot of steps of abstraction between those two things, but a lot of times in science we have to kind of create like a microcosm for the behavior we're interested in so that we can characterize it really precisely. We've done work looking at things like the development of the ability to self-regulate, and what that looks like in research settings might be to engage in controlled behaviors that require a person to withhold like a default action in order to wait for to take a correct action. So it sometimes has to do with delaying behaviors. It can also have to do with using cues in the environment about rewards or social outcomes or a variety of like valued outcomes to choose when to invest a lot of mental effort and energy and when to hold back. What we've found in general is that this is a skill that does fine-tune itself across adolescence. Adolescents already are able to self-regulate, just to be clear. They have a lot of existing abilities built, that they've already built. But the fine-tuning part comes into being selective about when to engage in that effort or when to use multiple different cues to orchestrate behavior. If we extrapolate back to what does that look like in an adolescent who's still developing those capacities actively? What it means, and this may actually have some relevance to entrepreneurial behavior, is that adolescents tend to spread their effort more widely. Adults are laser focused on this is my goal, I'm gonna do this and just enough of that, and forget about all the rest to achieve the goal. And that can be helpful in some situations. Adolescents are more diffuse, if you will. They will expend their effort and energy and think about goals in a broader way. This means that they may not be as lasered in on an expected outcome, but that could also have a flip side of being beneficial. For example, if outcomes are unknown, like if you're going out into the wilds and you don't know what outcomes would be, you could guess what they are and be laser focused about it, or you could keep yourself a bit spread and not hedge your bets in any particular direction. That could help you in achieving your goals in the long run when you can't know yet how to be laser focused. So this is something that could also create some hindrances for adolescents, but in the context of sort of innovation, creativity, trying new things, I think that spreading metaphor might provide some possibilities that adolescents may think about or try to pursue that adults just wouldn't occur to them to adults to be worth it.
Anthony, I would imagine this is the dynamic that captures starting a new business, right? When do you laser in? When do you keep an eye of the field of the broader market? When do you focus? When do you broad? Because you need to focus, but also still be aware of trends. Things change fast. Yeah. How do you do it?
Yeah, well, you do your best, first of all. No, I think it's an interesting point that you're bringing up, honestly, because I think about my own place in life at the moment, right? I'm definitely less concerned about the fact that I don't know the outcome. And it actually makes me a far better leader because I can balance different outcomes and setting us up for some blended de-risked outcome, which is not really clear, but we have a decent shot of achieving, which again probably goes back to, could be where I'm at in my life, could be other things. But you take what you can and you do your best to give yourself the best shots. I guess the example that I'm thinking of at the moment is that we started really specifically with youth athlete mentorship. Mentorship is a broader thing. It could be school, it could be music, right? These are constantly questions I get from investors. Would you ever do a tutoring kind of model? Would you expand to sports camps? Would you do sports clinics, right? There's just so much noise. And you can, when you're in a position where you're not so concerned about hitting a specific number or a specific target, you can pretty easily blend the risk, honestly. And that's kind of what I've been trying to do since we're still so early and the odds of failure are still so high.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. But again, just to bring it back to the things we've been talking about, in order to do this kind of thing, having the resources available to get started, having the proper coaching, but then also recognizing, as you pointed out, that experience does matter. And I think we don't have time to get into it, but the role of experience in adolescent decision-making does matter as well. Okay, why don't we open things up for questions, Q&A with the folks on stage? Could you introduce yourself when you ask?
Hi, I'm Zach Epstein from the Aspen Institute's Center for Rising Generations. First of all, thank you both. I appreciated the unintentional research practice partnership that was going on up there, where you kind of laid a groundwork and then you talked about putting it into work. Question for you, Anthony. You talked about, I think, the intended outcomes of the youth mentees. I'm really interested to hear what's the intended outcomes of the D1 athlete mentors. I like to think you're building entrepreneurs in all of them, but I'm curious kind of where you go with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think there's a few things, right? First and foremost, it's a job, right? So it's kind of another example where it provides them with structure. It's something that they can remain committed to. So it's another way for them to practice those skills, which is important. But I actually think more so what the most valuable thing that we've seen for the college athletes is it's reinforcing the value of this type of peer-to-peer connection from the other side of it at a far earlier age than you would probably otherwise be doing, right? Because the chances that we have college freshmen's 18, maybe even 17. Usually they're 19 or 20. To put them in that position of responsibility almost, where they are now investing in a young athlete and they do become emotionally invested in their success, I actually think that's probably the most valuable thing for them, alongside all the other things that you could put on a resume probably. But I think just that emotional development that comes with that maturity, it's a great opportunity for them to do it in something that's been pretty much their entire lives, and they are really, really qualified to do. So that would be my take on it.
Hi, I don't know if there's an answer to this, but we were talking at the table and Adriana asked us the question, because we were talking about risk a lot. What is risky? And it made me think, and then we were talking a little bit about how do we have people understand better the developing mind of the adolescent so that, they are allowing us to allow young people to do the things they're supposed to be doing, And I'm just wondering if you think, and I don't know, Leah, Andrew, or Anthony, who's the right one to answer it, or maybe there's no answer, but is there a better way to describe it than risk? Like, I just wonder if adults, like old adults like myself, will ever stop thinking risk is bad. Like, I was literally walking down the steps on the campus where Andrew told us to go look, and I said to Heather, who I was walking with, like, why aren't there any railings? Like, I'm worried kids are gonna be running to class and fall. Like, I suspect that happens there. And I just simply couldn't avoid what my brain did in that moment. And so I'm thinking of, like, how do we rebrand that it's not really risk, or maybe we should, I don't know. I'm just so curious what you guys are thinking.
Yeah, I could comment on that, but I think it's a really tricky problem because even in the research sphere, when someone hears about research on adolescent risk-taking or risky choice or risky decisions, usually the first thing that comes to mind is what I might call health risk behaviors that are like doing things that could put your physical self in danger, whether it be using substances or jumping off the ledge just for fun, running too fast. Yes, I mean, we could think of certain behaviors that could be associated with, poor health outcomes. And that's what, like, there's quite a lot of research on this from psychology, public health, and it's really important. And I think a lot of times research ends up putting a spotlight on things that are important for health, and there's good reasons for that. But I think it does give the word risk kind of a negative connotation. There's a whole different field of scholarly work in the field of judgment and decision making, which defines risk really differently. That's the approach that I generally take, which means it's a really broad definition that taking a risk means choosing something with a broader range of outcomes than something else. And so if you think about like going to a party versus staying home, like going to the party is the riskier choice because it could be really fun, or it could something really bad could happen. And staying home, it's like you kind of have a narrow range of what to expect. I think when it comes to like financial choices or entrepreneurship or innovation, like the riskier thing would be to like pursue your idea than to not. And so I think this definition can apply really widely. Maybe there would be a way to decouple that concept from the word risk, or to try to rebrand it in some way. I mean, I think exploration there's some technical reasons why scientists would tend to call that something slightly different, but I think that's a good proxy for more like real world discussion. And it carries that similar definition of choosing something where you don't, there's a range of possible outcomes that could come.
Joanna, I'll just say we struggle with this mightily as a center. We've talked through this a lot. Other people are trying to talk about healthy risk-taking, pro-social risk-taking. It still doesn't work. There's an issue with the word. It's similar to the issue of we need to make mistakes and learn from them. Actually, this is what we're designed during adolescence. That doesn't work as well either. So I do think it really is a serious framing challenge that we haven't come up with a solution for.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I
in the entrepreneurship world, how do you talk about risk? It's exciting, it's wonderful, let's embrace it, or do you have other words?
Yeah, I mean, I probably just have like a much higher objective tolerance for risk than most people. But again, I think it's probably mostly in the way that I frame risk to myself, like risk in the context of starting a business, for example. I love that you used range of outcomes, because what I would have said had she not said this was, like, I view pretty much any choice that you make, like there's like a distribution of possible outcomes, and like I'm just doing my best to pick the one that has the average that I'm looking for, and then I would pick one that's like disproportionately weighted towards the high outcome and has maybe more of a potential of a low outcome, but I don't really view that necessarily as like a negative. Like it just falls within the distribution of possible outcomes. And I think that you could go down to the very simple, like one single business decision as well, like same thing. Like you're just kind of weighing like what are all the possible outcomes. If I'm okay with the most negative outcome, it's not really that risky, so to speak. I don't know if that's practically useful, but.
Hi, my name is Lori Collier. I was curious to know about brain science and how personal trauma or systemic trauma impacts young people who want to be in the entrepreneurship opportunities that are available. Is there any research around that?
I'm not aware of any research that bridges all of those topics together. There has been research about the role that life experiences play in shaping brain development. And one of the arms of that field talk about the effects of negative experiences, and you can think of a variety of different possible negative experiences people could have. One example, there's research trying to take the idea of adversity and splitting it into subtopics of if individuals experience more threat-related adversity versus more deprivation-related adversity, which might be like the absence of the experiences that most kids get. Those two forms of adversity have really different impacts on brain development. The deprivation type tends to delay brain development in important brain systems for cognitive processing. It doesn't mean they can't be caught up, but there's some staggering that occurs at different points of development there. And the more threat-related, living in the presence of constant threat and vigilance and chronic stress, is thought to exert other impacts on brain development related especially to emotional and threat processing brain systems. But the field of brain development and influences by environmental processes and experience is something that is very much an active area of research, and being active in a sort of newer area of research essentially means there's still a lot for us to learn. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Merlot. At our table, I was talking about something that like changed the game for me for entrepreneurship, and it was the Google Passion Project. I had that opportunity at my school where I created my own passion project, and it flourished very well. At the same time, there can always be the risk of something falling through. And in my case, that didn't happen. However, I feel like that might make it more difficult for youth to continue on and to keep trudging the road and figuring out where they want to go with their economic development and their entrepreneurship. So I was wondering if like getting a no or if something falls through affects the brain development at all, and if you've studied that or if you've seen research on that. Yeah.
When something fell through, you mean like something doesn't take off the way you want it to?
Yeah, or if like the business that they're creating doesn't work out.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not aware of any research on adolescent entrepreneurs and the brain, period. I think a lot of these are entirely unknown research questions. There might be sort of tangential research that's relevant and related, but in terms of like outcomes of, let's broaden the category a little bit to like personal disappointments or some form of what someone might call like a setback or failure. I'm not actually aware of any like acute effects on brain development from those experiences, although I will say that those would be the kinds of experiences that I think could really prompt adolescents to learn a lot of important lessons, including coping with disappointment, being, committed to persisting through difficult times, and also, experiences of stress. And so I think these are all really relevant topics that ought to be researched more.
Yeah.
Leah, what about the idea that adolescents are more capable of actually updating their knowledge based upon something that doesn't succeed?
Yeah, great question. So there's research on how adolescents are tuned to learning from like positive and negative outcomes. In general, like there's a lot of research there. The full story is a little bit complicated, but essentially getting feedback that the thing that you chose or the thing you did turned out to have positive or negative outcomes is something that adolescents are really attuned to, and they actually can adjust their choices more flexibly than adults in response to these kinds of sort of good and bad emotion-laden outcomes. And so this might be a point for that adolescents could capitalize on those experiences to really stamp in a life lesson that could carry them, through for a long time.
Well, thank you, Leah. Thank you, Anthony. We need to move on, but please, I know there were still other hands here. Please bring them to the reception. That is part of the conversation we're going to continue. So thank you again.